No mai, haere mai, tēnā koutou katoa. We will start off today with a karakia to bring us all into the same place and kind of ground us in this kōrero today. Tū tara mai I runga, tū tara mai I raro, tū tara mai I waho, tū tara mai I roto. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Well, kia ora koutou, thanks so much for joining us. I realise I can't actually see the who is joining us today since I'm presenting on the screen, but welcome. We thought we'd keep a tight schedule today because trying to be succinct in a 45-minute session and allow some time for Q&A at the end. So, kia ora, ko Tori Calver tōku ingoa. I am the Head of Advisory and Impact at Sustainable Business Network, which means that in my remit comes our own impact reporting that I do alongside Fiona, who will introduce herself shortly. But it also means that I get to work with organisations through my advisory capacity of all shapes and sizes, helping them to identify where they are today, where they want or need to get to, and put plans in place to close the gap between the two. And something that comes up quite a lot is around how best to report and communicate what they are doing and what they've yet to do to their various stakeholders. And that's really the focus of today's webinar. So I will pass over to Fiona to introduce herself.
Thank you, Tori. Kia ora koutou, ko Fiona Stephenson tōku ingoa. It's great to have you joining us today to talk about sustainability and impact reporting. So I look after our communications and marketing, and I work with Tori and Teresa Gear, who is our accountant, on our own report. And we've been doing this for a number of years now to hone our work. So my role is the writing of it and also sharing it afterwards. So Tori and I will tag team today to share what we've learned over the years and hopefully help you as well. So we'll just go through some of the contents of how I'll run the session today. So first of all, Tori will talk about sustainability reporting and how that differs from impact reporting. I'll go through some of the reasons why you should report in the first place. Then I'll hand back to Tori to look at some of the main formats of sustainability reports. And then I'll go through some best practice tips for the reports, and hopefully we have time at the end for some Q&A. So without further ado, I hand over to Tori to look at the sustainability and impact reporting.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Fiona. Okay, so first, it's always good to start with a bit of a definition around what we're talking about. So essentially, what is a sustainability report? It's a report that measures and communicates performance against ESG or environmental, social and governance factors. So a much wider story for the organisation. Sometimes it seems like it's a bit of a wild west out there when it comes to all the various frameworks and guidelines and standards that there are. And because often it isn't regulated and is voluntary, you do get a lot of reports that are variable in shapes and sizes that are according to international frameworks or not, and that are included as part of or separate to the organisation's annual and financial reporting. So today we're really going to look at what is best practice in this space, and also just give a quick overview of some of the more popular standards and what is used particularly in New Zealand. Now, I think it's also quite good just to spend some time kind of identifying what we talk about when we talk about impact, and really alongside the rise of sustainability reporting has become an increased focus on impact. And sustainability really by definition is the capacity to endure, and we are seeing a shift because of the degenerated state that we're in around the need to actively do good, and this starts to lead us into the realm of impact. So impact by definition is a marked effect or influence, and I do want to call out that word marked because there should be some ability to observe and ideally measure the effect. I really like the connective definition of impact, which is the long-term economic, social, environmental, cultural, or political changes that arise from actions by individuals or groups in society. Of course, an impact can be positive or negative, intended or unintended. So impact management is really that process of identifying possible positive and negative impacts that your organization has, and then your work to reduce those negative impacts and increase the positive. So impact reporting can often be included within sustainability reporting, or it can sit separate. It's really a tangible way to communicate the benefits of what your organization does to various stakeholders and the changes that your organization has had, the activities that you've done to create positive impact. It's really about how your outcomes, how your activities have produced meaningful change outside of your own organization. Now, impact reporting is not always easy. It can be a particularly challenging space to understand. Impact doesn't occur in isolation from an organization's activities, because we're talking about having that tangible impact outside, and there could be variable factors that might affect those. But to try to kind of make this and to do this as well as you can follow essentially what we would call kind of a pathway to impact, which is really linking the inputs, the activities your organization does with the outcomes and the impact that you are working towards as an organization. It isn't a linear process, but this is just a way to kind of get you to think about it and how you might be able to track that as an organization. Down the right, I've outlined here the theory of change. That might be a new term for some people. Essentially, a theory of change explains how the activities of your organization are understood to produce the outcomes, the impacts that you're trying to see. So it essentially helps you to draw that red thread between what you do and the impact that you have outside of your own organization. And a theory of change should be based on kind of robust data and research, and a number of organizations working in this space will often define that and share that externally as well. So if we wanted to kind of follow through this pathway with the example of, for example, nature regeneration, which is an area that we do at SBN, you think about what are the inputs that you need. So you need money to buy or to grow seeds. You need people to plant them. You might need spade, gloves if you don't want to get your hands dirty. What are the activities? You might need to fundraise. You might need to hire people to plant those plants. The outputs would be the number of plants that you put in the ground. And then we start to get into some more interesting areas, but for me in particular, which are the outcomes. And this is really the specific and measurable short-term, medium effects. It could be, the well-being of people, or improvements in the place. So, we start to see the plants grow. That might bring back more bird life because you're creating food. We're starting to see kind of carbon sequestration, increased connection with the community who've now got a closer use of green space. And all leading to kind of that long-term impact of maybe we finally got a clean water, maybe whitebait are coming back to that area, providing nutrition. You've got thriving biodiversity because you've improved the moldy, and you've got a healthier community who's interacting with this space and connected, and there's lots of research that shows that connection with, improve on our own health and well-being with connection with green spaces and the natural environment. So that's essentially how you might start to think and tell those stories. So it is a mix of the numbers, the quantitative data, as well as the qualitative. And for me, it's really the stories that sit behind the numbers that connect most with people. So organizations, when they are sharing this, might do this in a standalone impact report or include essentially what are impact measures within an existing annual or sustainability report. And so we've just got a couple of examples of two different ways. So the first is Calver Drinks. So they released an impact report celebrating 10 years, and they do a lot of great work supporting the lives and livelihoods of their growers. I love this quote, if you educate a man, you educate an individual. If you educate a woman, you educate a nation. And they kind of link that with the investment that they're making to help girls go through school and through uni, and supporting kind of both the physical classroom as well as making it easier for people to go to school. So there's obviously some wonderful numbers that they have around the number of people that they've done that with. And then they've also got stories around, the individuals that sit behind that number. Really powerful way of kind of sharing the impact that they're having as an organization through how they operate. When we first started working in the space, we actually did a standalone impact report that just was a bit less constraining, and we could kind of talk about outside of a financial year. And that is one of the challenges with impact reporting. Because you are looking at a longer period of time, it's really hard to just kind of within a financial year say the impact, that kind of final goal based on the activity. So often you will see kind of more output metrics happening there. We now do include it in our annual reporting. We, as kind of respond under the public benefits entity standards, which are mandatory and go under, guided by the external reporting board. And so we get audited. So now our financial alongside these are audited, which we love because it kind of make sure that we have even better transparency verification processes in place. Again, it's that mix of qualitative and quantitative data, because we can talk about the number of people that we train, but really for us, the impact is what do the people do with that extra knowledge? What is the actions that they then have? So we have to stay a bit closer. We survey, we interview to actually understand what have they done, and the outcomes that we can start to see and tell our investors and us what those are. Okay, Fiona, I think it is now over to you.
Thank you, Tori. So I think it's really important to know in the first place why you're reporting. Now, sometimes this is mandatory, for example, with the new climate-related disclosures, which apply to larger corporates. And sometimes it's mandatory if you're a registered charity like us, which Tori's already alluded to. We have very defined reporting standards we have to follow. But in most cases, it's a voluntary thing to do, in which case it's all the more important to know why you're doing it in the first place. So Tori, if you go to the next slide, there are a number of benefits I can just run through. And I think first and foremost, it's all about building trust and credibility for your organization. Whatever it is you do, it's one thing to have a page on your website to talk about the sustainability you're doing in generic terms, but reporting takes it to a whole new level. And increasingly, people want to know that whole new level. They want to know what targets you've set and how you're doing, good and bad. And they want that to be available to find. So if you can set this out in the format of a report, it really helps build that trust and credibility with all of your stakeholders. And that goes through to transparency and accountability. People don't expect you to be perfect. So if you're not hitting all your targets, that's okay, but people want to know what the targets are you've set and how you're performing against them. And if you're not performing, why not? So they want to know the good and the bad. And that transparency goes such a long way to build that credibility for your organization. Reporting also helps you identify any risks and opportunities. And often you find, unless you actually sit down and look at it as a whole, you're not aware of what some of those risks are. So that can help build resilience for your organization if you can set some frameworks in place to counter them once you've identified what they are. And in terms of holistically as an organization, a report is so much more than just a report, because it helps you bring you together. Particularly if you're an organization that's medium or larger size, you might have lots of different departments or parts of your organization that have their own KPIs and work independently. But it's so important to understand as a business or organization what you're working to together. What is your purpose? I mean, even at SBN, we have coming up to about 30 staff now. We do a lot of different things, and we find that our different groups are working to the different goals. And it's been so useful and important for our organization to understand what we're working to together, because we're a team together. How do the different parts fit together into the bigger whole? And a report can really help do that if you set a clear purpose and how all your targets are meeting that purpose wherever you are in the organization. And that helps the staff engagement. If someone in the organization, wherever they are, understands how their role fits into the bigger whole, it can help to keep them involved. And that helps with recruitment and retention as well, which is super important in this environment. You can set milestones and celebrate successes. So if you hit the targets, that's great. And without reports, you might not even have those successes to celebrate. So it can be really helpful to set yourself clear goals to measure your progress. And finally, connecting with your stakeholders, really important way of engaging with them and showing them the impact you're having together. Tori, next slide, please. So the flip side to this is the growing risks of not reporting. So in the media, there are more and more stories about greenwashing, and that's when an organization makes itself out to be more sustainable than it really is, and includes things like having generic terms on their website about doing good sustainability things. Or it might be when they talk about an area they're doing really well in, but not talking about what the rest of the organization is doing. And reporting is a really good way to counteract that, because you're being honest and transparent about the goals you've set and the progress you're making against them. Whether you're hitting the targets or not, it goes a long way to counteract any accusations of greenwashing, because you're being much more open about what you're doing. The opposite to greenwashing is green hushing, which is a relatively new term that's been adopted. And that's when organizations don't talk about their sustainability actions at all, because they're being afraid of being criticized for what they're not doing or not being perfect. The problem with that, if you don't talk about your sustainability work at all, people may think you're not doing anything. And a good example of that is Icebreaker. So back in 2017, there's an annual report called the Ethical Fashion Report. Now, Icebreaker came bottom of that list in 2017 with a D ranking. Even though they were doing some great stuff on sustainability, it wasn't readily accessible. They didn't have a report, or it wasn't in a format that people could see it. And so they scored at the bottom of the list. But to their absolute credit, what they did in the year following, they got themselves together and they produced a transparency report, which laid out all the work they were already doing, but with targets and it easily accessible. And then the following year, they shot right up to an A+ rating, just because that information was now readily available. So I think it's, if you can do it, it goes a long way to building trust. Next slide, please, Tori. This is a really nice quote, I think, which explains why a sustainability report is more than just a report. So when we make the time, and it does take time, to understand and then share the current and potential impact of our work and explore what it might mean to us each as employees, we create the motivating drive that's required to transform our economy. And we really need that motivating drive, because it's, if you look at what's happening in the world with climate, the floods, the fires, we need that transformation. And so a report is one thing you can do to really bring about that change. Tori, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Fiona. I think it was good to call out as well. I love that example of Icebreaker, and I know a number of the SBN team were actually involved in helping them bring that to life, and really cool to get involved in that journey and see where they've taken it as well. So as I mentioned at the beginning there, reports of all shapes, sizes and types, and we are not going to go all through all of those today because we would be here till next year. What we are going to do is go over just a couple of the more commonly used in New Zealand that are particularly good standards, to kind of understand if they might be the right fit for your organisation. And before I did that, I just wanted to kind of give an example of what this space looks like, and this is by no means a comprehensive list of all the standards and frameworks out there, but also it shows that there is a bit of a difference between a standard and a framework, and I thought it'd be worthwhile just to define what that is. Where essentially standards are the more detailed and specific guidelines that build upon the principles set forth by the framework. So they tend to kind of have metrics, indicators, more specific sustainability types, and we're going to talk about a couple of standards today. As I mentioned, this isn't a comprehensive list. For example, B Corp is used by more organisations as a framework against which to report, and that does allow for that kind of comparison against other organisations as well. But this is often what the kind of global picture will look like. So let's start with the Global Reporting Initiative, the GRI, and there are a lot of acronyms in this space. I'm going to do my best not to trip up over them, but also some of the things they stand for are very long, so excuse me if I do use the acronyms on occasion as well. This, the Global Reporting Framework was established in the late 1990s, and as such it is the most widely used. I think somewhere between 10 to 11,000 organisations aligning with this globally. Still a small number when thinking about how many organisations there are globally, but it is a really well-known and standardised framework that continues to be kind of updated on a regular basis. It often will sit separate to the financial reporting. It is a voluntary framework. Because it is widely used, it is allowing for benchmarking and comparison, both within an organisation and year after year, because they're reporting, the annual reports take a similar framing, but as well as between organisations, so that stakeholders can actually understand, you know, how good is what they are doing. It has a focus of really inside out. So what are the impacts that its organisation have on ESG criteria? It supports organisations, and it really does have a strong focus on identifying the material topics. So the first thing that you'll often need to do is to identify and do a materiality assessment. And for those who aren't aware of that term, essentially that means working with your stakeholders, assessing, you know, interviewing your stakeholders to understand what are the most relevant or material topics for you as an organisation that you need to be ensuring you're addressing. So for instance, if you were a beverage company, water use would be a really material topic. The GRI provide a modular kind of system, providing 3 series of standards, so universal, applying to all, sector specific. So if there is a sector specific standards for a sector that you operate in, you are expected to use those standards in your reporting, as well as topic standards, which are things like waste, health and safety, tax. There is a huge amount of resource that GRI provide, as well as training. So, you know, many organisations might kind of go to external help to help when doing their first report, but also there is a lot of information that people can draw on to do it in-house. So you can do kind of training videos and make sure there's really step-by-step guidance to make sure that you are reporting in accordance with this framework and therefore won't get called out for too much cherry picking, which can definitely be something that organisations can do, being voluntary frameworks. Okay, here are a couple of examples. The GRI is used by small as well as large organisations. A couple from our network. We have Kōkako on the left and Westpac on the right. As you can see here, they've both identified their material topics at the beginning of their report, and then they discuss what they're doing around kind of mitigating against the negative and focusing on increasing the positive. So just a couple of different ways that they've kind of displayed that information through the report. Okay, second up, we have the International Integrated Reporting Framework. I'm going to call that integrated reporting for short. Essentially, the primary purpose of an integrated report is to explain to providers of financial capital how an organisation creates, preserves, or erodes value over time. It is also voluntary because of that kind of idea of really wanting to give a full picture to investors. It also ties in with financial reporting, making it one report. That does mean it can be more time consuming for some organizations to use this format, but it also does have a great robustness around it, and you're kind of providing all the information for key stakeholders in one place. The GRI is really a multiple kind of stakeholder format as well, where it's thinking about your customers, your suppliers, and trying to provide that information to a variety in an accessible way. The integrated report, just that extra kind of onus on investors there. It very much aims to support integrated thinking and that look to the short, the medium, and the long term. And I think this ties back in with Fiona's point around how a report can help kind of feed back into organizational strategy, because and it's a way, if you're kind of maybe wanting to see this play higher in your organization strategy and you're not reporting yet, then choosing the framework that's actually going to influence key stakeholders, your own team, because once you start reporting, you obviously have to be thinking and doing things in that way as well. This has a really big focus on value, and they've identified kind of 6 capitals: financial, manufactured, intellectual, human, social, and relationship, and natural. And what you can kind of see here is, so through its business operations, what are the risks, the opportunities that organization has? What is the outlook? What is its performance? How does it draw on these various capitals and use them? And then through its business activities, how does it affect those? And does it create, preserve, or erode the value of these various capitals over time? How robust an organization is this? How good is it? Both the GRI and integrated reporting have strong principle foundation, and there's actually a lot of correlation between the principles of the two. So often you can kind of draw red threads across, and there are certain requirements that you have to meet in order to claim this report is in accordance with the framework. So while obviously being voluntary, people can decide what they include or don't include, there's definitely strong guidance around what you should be including in order to be kind of as robust as possible. Again, used by a few New Zealand organisations. It's newer than the Global Reporting Initiative, and because it includes that financial component, it doesn't have as many as the GRI, but it's on the up. Here you can see how a couple of different organisations reporting, the NZ Post and Te Runanga or Ngā Tahu Group, are showing the value, being a really important bit of what's the value that these organisations create external to their own organisation. And remember, there will be that kind of impact look back in as well. So within these frameworks, while they've got strong and standards, they've got strong guidelines, they're definitely not always prescriptive. So they tell you the information that you need to include, but how you include that, how you display it, can be very much still in line with how you storytell as an organization, so it resonates with your stakeholders. I think there was a comment around sustainable development goals in the chat earlier. This is something that a lot of organisations, not as many in New Zealand, but particularly globally, do look at when kind of identifying how they operate and the impact on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and linking their activity through. This does not need to sit outside of these frameworks by any means. You see organisations using these standards and still including connection through to the Sustainable Development Goals. Just a couple of examples on the right. So ThinkStep do an integrated report. And this is a piece from that report, kind of drawing the link between their work and Sustainable Development Goals, as well as Kōkaku, who use the GRI format. So very much still, if you're an organisation who looks at the SDGs, that will often be that's something you can include under these different standards. Okay, so we're moving now from the voluntary space to the mandatory space. This is a world first in New Zealand regulating climate-related disclosures, or the CRD for short. So just under 200 organisations in New Zealand are impacted by this. Hopefully, if you are, you know you are, because there is definite work to be done. It kicks in from January this year. So we will see the first reports under this framework happen, or standard happen, next year. So large listed companies, large registered banks, insurers, credit unions, building societies, and managers of investment schemes. And because we're kind of following that money, it is expected to have a strong trickle-down impact, because a lot of the banks, for instance, their most material impact is their financed emissions. So what that means is they're having to kind of disclose around how climate change is impacting and may further impact their ability to deliver against their strategy, and what action they're taking to mitigate and adapt. And that includes scenario analysis. So what does their organisation look like under 1.53 degree warming, for example, and transition planning. So if your biggest impact is with the emissions with essentially what you finance, then you're going to need to work with those companies to help bring that risk down. So I do think it's important for organisations who don't come under this scheme to still be thinking about how they are managing that risk for their own organisation, so that they ensure they still have access to capital over the coming years. These standards are created by the External Reporting Board, the XRB, but they will be enforced by the Financial Markets Authority, or the FMA. And while they've been localized, they do draw on global framework of the TCFD, or the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Now, I did mention that no entity is needed to report under the CRD, because we only just found out what exactly that looks like. But I do have an example here of Westpac, who were voluntarily reporting under the TCFD framework, and that's put them in good stead for upcoming reports. And I think that's, again, another motivation, that as this space continues to change pretty rapidly, and you don't know what one day kind of might change from voluntary to mandatory, I think it's a good reason to kind of get ahead of the game and be making sure that you are reporting around this area. Okay, so because we're just going to briefly touch on this because it can be a bit confusing, but because of the plethora of frameworks and standards out there, and because investors are getting more and more savvy and wanting to understand how robust different organizations are when we look at things like climate change. The International Sustainability Standard Boards has now been established. It is part of the Financial Reporting Standards Foundation, who set a lot of the financial comparisons and which enable investors to compare apples with apples. And so essentially they're expanding that to include ESG criteria so investors can get a fuller picture. Again, it's voluntary. They've only just released their first inaugural standards. It is building on existing frameworks and nods to ones like the SASB, the integrated reporting, the TCFD that we've kind of mentioned. Its key audience is investors. It is primarily an outside-in view of where you're kind of looking at what are the impacts that affect that enterprise value. And I was at a responsible investing conference yesterday, and direct quote with the XRB that said nothing in the ISSB standards that XRB see will actually bring about behavioural change. So I think this is just an important kind of framing to note that this is happening, work's being done on a global basis. More organisations are expected to report on this. But for us, we think it's really important to remember the why behind, and actually we're wanting organisations to fundamentally shift how they think and about value and genuinely make change rather than just report to look like they are. And then just bringing it back locally, so now that the climate related disclosures are out, they'll obviously continue to work on those, but XRB also have a mandate around providing some guidance around voluntary sustainability reporting. And so they are developing that at the moment, still quite in its infancy, as I understand it, under a program called NAPO or Te Kawa Ora, essentially means kind of principles behind the pillars of life. And something that I think's pretty great from a localized perspective, that they're talking about drawing on Te Ao Māori worldview and frameworks that are existing there. So we don't know what this is going to look like, but again, the chief executive spoke about this initiative yesterday and gave some indication of direction of travel. And what I thought was quite amazing is she talked about their work on the climate-related disclosures and their work kind of thinking about this space has actually caused them as an organisation to step back and really think about how they are intergenerational in their impact. And so they called out that it's going to be really important to state your purpose, to describe how you're going to deliver and the impacts beyond you and what you will do about them. Okay, over to Fiona, and I think I took far too much time on that section, so apologies, Fiona.
No worries. Thank you, Tori. So I'm just going to run through a few tips that we picked up along the way. So Tori, the next slide, please. So I can't stress enough the importance of getting organised well in advance. So the process is super important. So plan and prepare. So that's look at what framework you're going to be following. What does it mean? So obviously the reporting period is 1 year, but you need to get organised well in advance of that, setting the targets, who's going to do what. So it takes a whole team to do this well. You obviously need your finance and accounting team to collect the financial information. You need someone to collect your impact data and the evidence. You need someone to write it. You need a proofreader. You need a designer to bring it to life, to create the visual impact. And unless you all work together, you're not going to get the best output. So getting super clear early on of who's doing what and when can make all the difference. And don't leave it to the last minute. These things always take time. And the more preparation you can put in, the easier the process is going to be when you come to actually getting into the detail. Thank you, Tori. So in terms of best practice, I always think it's important to keep it simple. There's so much detail you can include. And the truth is, not everyone is going to read every line of your report. However much work you put into it and however beautifully it's written, they're just not. So the simpler you can make it, the better. That's easier for people to read and access the information, because the whole point of you doing this is you want people to come away and understand more about your organization. And that's a whole lot easier if you can make it simple for them. So that might mean mixing up the content a bit, identify the highlights. Tori showed a slide earlier where we had some of the figures, the highlights of our own report. So pull out what are the main things you want people to take away and remember, because it's going to be hard for them to take in the whole lot. So the content format, people take in information in different ways. Some people prefer pictures, some people prefer infographics, some like to read the words. So if you can mix it up a bit, that helps different people get the information in the way they prefer. It also makes it look easier and digestible, just mixing that up a bit. So that's a mix of the narrative, some case studies, some figures, infographics, and testimonials as well. Make it your own. So when you have images, as far as possible, try and have photos of your own team, your own organization doing action on the ground. It may not be possible all the time and you might need to use some stock images, but if you can use your own images of your own team, it makes it more real. And that includes including quotes from your staff as well. Be transparent. So that means including the good with the bad. So no one expects you to be perfect, but they do want to see the progress you're making. And as I said before, it really builds that trust if you can be honest about your shortcomings and why as well. Make sure you have evidence so you can be verified on everything. So if you do have to be audited, you will have to do that anyway to collate evidence for every fact that you state. But even if it's a voluntary report, really important that you can actually back up everything you're stating. So as you go along and collect that data, make sure you've got some proof to back it up in case you are asked. Proportionality means considering the size of your organization. So the more you do, the more people expect you to be more detailed and have more evidence. So if you're a small organization, people won't expect too much from you. So just think about that in terms of expectations. And finally, make your report easily found on your website and other formats as well. And whether that means social media, share in your newsletter and other ways too. Next slide, please, Tori. And these are just a couple of examples. So these are a few slides from our most recent annual report, just to show what we're doing. So the wheel with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is just picturing in a visual format our 5 main goals to make it more interesting to see. You can see a lovely photo of Pete from our team out in the field, hard at work. And then the bottom image shows some narrative combined with a testimonial and a case study. So we won the Best Sustainability Report for our annual report last year for the Charity Reporting Awards, which we're super proud of. So hopefully it shows that we kind of know what we're doing. Next slide, please, Tori. Yes, so another really important, and we're running out of time, so I'll just run through this quickly. Once you've done your report, that isn't the end of it. What's really important is that you share it with the people who matter. So think about who those people are, and the most important one is your own staff. Often forgotten, but your internal audience is the most important audience of all to make sure they're on board with what you're trying to achieve. Try and be creative about how you might share it. Obviously, your website, you want to put it there. Where else can you share it and how can you do it? Could you perhaps create an infographic for your social media channels or your newsletters? And think year round. It's not just at the end, job done. Can you share your impact throughout the year? If you have things you're measuring throughout, could you have perhaps a counter on your website ticking over time to show the progress, so it's not just static? And finally, don't forget to say thank you to all the people who've helped you achieve that impact, because you can't do it on your own. Collaboration is key to everything. And next slide, Tori. I'm just going to show a couple of examples. So the banner across the top is a screenshot from Etik's website. And what they're really good at doing is showing the impact that their work has year round. And this counter updates all the time. It's showing things like how many trees have been planted, how much water has been saved as a result of their work. So they're really good at showing the impact their products have to the people who buy them through their social media and through their website. The bottom screenshot is from B Corp. This one here, we're going to All Heart. So All Heart creates some awesome infographics for social media. So once they've done their annual report, they bring it to life through these infographics, which they share through all the other channels. And that makes it really easy to digest what they've done in an impact. You can just pull it out really easily. And one more image, the next slide. Zero Waste Network, again, lovely image which brings to life what they're doing. So they've just pulled out some of the key figures which make it easy to see their work. So try and be creative if you can to share what you've done. And I'm going to wrap up with the final slide because we've shared an awful lot of information with you and hopefully we haven't bamboozled you. But in summary, 3 key points. Reporting is good for business. It's so much more than just a report. It is good for your whole organization. Choose whatever format works best for you and let it inform how you work and incorporate it into your storytelling year round. Now we're nearly running out of time. Do we have any quick questions from anybody or do we have no more time? What I will say is that you can contact Tori and me by email afterwards. We'll be happy to answer any questions. Tori's email is tori@sustainable.org.nz and I'm Fiona@sustainable.org.nz. Do we have any burning questions that can't wait in the meantime?
Yeah, and there is one in the chat, just the one, and we'll answer, and apologies for my time management today. Yeah, I think how you're connecting with the employees, like there's a lot in that. I think it does come a bit to the purpose and the role that they can play in getting them involved in actually that link between the impact that you're trying to have as an organization, what's the role that they can play in that, what would they like to see, so that they're involved to a certain extent in kind of design, or at least connecting with that purpose. But there's actually quite a lot we could talk about there, so please get in touch, Dylan, if you want, and we can dig a little bit further and have a good kōrero on that one, but conscious of giving people some lunch hour back. Shout out of, we are doing an amazing masterclass next month, so shameless promotion of that because we think it's going to be an awesome day. You can join online or in person. I think early bird tickets end this week, so yeah, we highly advise. There's some just great speakers at that one. And yeah, please feel free to get in touch, as Fiona said, with either of us. And thanks so much for your time today. And we will just close out today in the closing karakia. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātea, kia mama te nāko, te tinana, te wairua ki te ara tangata. Koia rā e rongo, whakairehia ake ki runga, kia tina, tina, hui e, tai ki e. Ka kite anō.
Kia ora.